I went camping 10 years ago and I haven't been the same since. The camping trip was Mikey's idea. We deserved a little vacation, he had said. An opportunity to escape our cramped, cluttered college house and commune with the great outdoors. He had leaned into the centre of our clump one night, the same devious glint in his eyes that he always got whenever he was about to drag us into trouble, and said, "How about a trip up the mountain?" "I don't know," Cynthia had replied, a bottle of grenadine in one hand and a bottle of Tito's in the other. "I'm not very outdoorsy. None of us are." My boyfriend, Josh, agreed. "Oh, come on," Mikey urged, slinging an arm around my shoulder. "Catherine thinks it's a great idea, right, Kath?" I looked around the room at my friends, at our messy, half-hearted attempt at a pre-game. Autumn cuddled up against her girlfriend Sylvia, Josh and Mikey, bookending me on the lumpy couch. I loved every part of that small, shitty house I shared with my friends, the wall full of Polaroid pictures, the TV we never got around to mounting, the cat we adopted off the street curled up by my feet. I was going to miss it all. We would all be graduating from college in just a couple weeks, and then our little gang would be disbanding for the summer. It would be nice to spend some quality time with friends before we all had to grow up and enter the real world. "Sure," I agreed. "Why not? Let's go." Mikey fist pumped a little too forcefully and sloshed his drink onto my jeans. Autumn giggled and raised her cup. "What the hell? I'm in too." So, even though we all preferred the sanctuary of our dilapidated college house to the great outdoors, we had moshed our half-empty solo cups together and agreed to a trip up the mountain. After Friday classes surrendered their hold on us, our group of 5 piled into Mikey's old van and took off into the mess of patchy forest that surrounded campus. The balmy April air and the gentle jostling of country roads quickly put me to sleep, as I rested my head on Josh's steady shoulder. It was the kind of sleep that never fully took hold, making me aware that I was going somewhere but completely unaware of where that somewhere might be. When the jolting dip of a pothole shoved me back into consciousness, we were on the 3rd hour of our journey. The old van shook as we climbed the steep mountain toward the campsite, and the overgrown gravel road we were following looked as if it hadn't been driven on in years. In the seats in front of me, Autumn and Sylvia were looking out their respective windows, admiring the deep ocean of trees that flew past us as we drove. Eventually, our gravel path disappeared under a suffocating layer of encroaching vines, and Mikey pulled the van to the side of the road. "Rise and shine, campers," he called back to us. "We're hiking the rest of the way up." After an hour of trudging over rocks, weighed down by our heavy backpacks, we crested the summit. The top of the mountain was idyllic, a flat expanse of untrampled grass that felt like it had been tucked away just for us. The rocky ground plateaued out into a perfect clearing, curtained off by a dense border of tall, tangled trees. It felt like our own secluded paradise, high above the rest of the world. I shrugged off my bag and breathed in the clean forest air. We had made it. We wasted no time setting up camp. By the time the 3 tents were pitched and the fire was built, we were all exhausted. But none of us wanted to be the loser who went to sleep first, so we sat around the campfire for hours telling ghost stories and cracking jokes. Somewhere in the middle of Mikey's 3rd story about Mothman, I turned to Autumn. "How did you find this campsite, Autumn? Have you been here before?" "No, I haven't. I just asked for campsite suggestions on Reddit, and someone suggested this place." She shrugged, her blonde curls bouncing over her flannel-clad shoulders. "Because that's not sketchy at all." Josh laughed. Autumn gave Josh a defensive shove, and he snatched her up into a playful headlock, their embrace collapsing into a mess of giggles as Sylvia jabbed at them both with a pointy stick she had claimed off the ground. "You've heard the stories about this place, though, haven't you?" Sylvia asked us, arching an eyebrow. "You know I grew up around here, and my parents were always telling us stories about the mountain. They didn't want us coming up here. They said there were always stories about hikers getting lost in the forest and never being found." "That's it?" Mikey asked. The stories I heard were way more interesting. I heard people used to live on this mountain, but they had to evacuate the whole place because of some Chernobyl-type situation. Either that, or a huge forest fire wiped them all out. I can't remember. I rolled my eyes. Mikey was never one for the specifics. Where did you hear all that nonsense? On one of your weird conspiracy blogs? Josh laughed. I actually don't think Mikey is completely wrong this time. Look, I pointed across the perfectly empty clearing to a lump in the overgrown darkness that I had noticed while we were setting up camp. It was a small pile of bricks, the collapsed remnants of a wall that hadn't stood for a very long time. Whatever building used to be here, it was long gone. Sylvia shook her head. I don't know anything about all that. But there was a small commune that tried to live up here a while ago. I don't remember exactly what happened, but they kind of just fell off the radar. I think the police were looking into it. Josh looked around the silent clearing. Well, I don't know what happened to them, but they're definitely not here anymore. Maybe one day they all just vanished. Autumn leaned in close, wiggling her fingers at us, letting the flames of the fire light up her face dramatically before she erupted into a drowsy fit of giggles. Okay. I chuckled. That's enough conspiracy theory talk for tonight. Let's head to bed. I woke to the crackling sound of sausages cooking over the fire and the pink light of morning piercing its way through the mesh of my tent. I emerged from the tent to see Josh, Autumn and Sylvia sitting around the fire, laughing and poking each other with the skewered hot dogs they were broiling. My stomach growled hungrily at the sight of breakfast. Hey guys, I greeted. Is Mikey still asleep? He's going to be mad y'all are eating without him. Josh turned to me, the fresh light of the morning haloing his handsome face. I expected him to make a joke about Mikey oversleeping. I expected him to pull me into a tight embrace and to cook me some breakfast over the campfire. I expected a smile, his eyes crinkling in amusement. Instead, his eyes were completely dead, void of any semblance of recognition. I'll never forget that look he gave me. That was the look that started it all. And all these years later, I can still see his blank eyes when I close my own. He quirked his head to one side and asked, "Who's Mikey?" I stopped dead in my tracks, the wet grass scratching at my halted legs. "Mikey," I repeated. "Where is he? Is he still sleeping?" "What are you talking about, Catherine?" Sylvia asked, her sharp brow cutting across her forehead. "Who is Mikey?" They were just messing with me. They had to be messing with me. I tried to wipe the dumb expression off my face and take a breath. I felt a little stupid for falling for their little charade. It was so typical of Mikey to want to pull a prank on the friend who slept in the longest. He was always the jester, and I was always the fool who worried and fretted over his stupid antics. The only thing that surprised me was how committed the rest of the gang was to acting out Mikey's dumb idea of a prank. Usually, one of them would have cracked by now. I turned and stomped away from my friends. I was tired, and I wasn't in the mood for whatever stupid prank they were trying to pull. I unzipped the door to Mikey's tent and was met by an empty interior. A mess of clothing, books and snacks littered the floor, but there was no Mikey inside the lumpy sleeping bag. When I turned to rejoin my friends, I expected to see stolen glances and stifled laughter, but I was met with the same hauntingly blank confusion. "What are you doing?" Autumn asked. I threw my hands up in exasperation. "Well, he's not in his tent, so where is he hiding?" "That's my tent," Josh said. "We agreed to bring 2 tents for the 2 of us because I'm such a slob and you like your personal space. Do you not remember?" He was looking at me with such confusion and concern that I had to look away, unable to meet his falsely sincere eyes. This was so stupid. I was always the gullible friend the others loved to mess with, always the butt of one of their stupid jokes. No matter how stupid this prank was, their commitment had me almost doubting my own memory. It was a nauseating sensation I wanted to be rid of as soon as possible. This would all be over faster if I just went along with the joke. Okay, very funny. I laughed, coming to sit next to Josh on one of the logs that surrounded the fire. If he wants to hide in the woods and try to scare me instead of eating breakfast, that's his choice. I turned to give Josh a kiss. but his face was still twisted into a look of total bewilderment. He looked so convincingly dumbfounded by my words that it gave me the creeps. There was no hint of amusement or playfulness behind his eyes, only emptiness. Whatever weird joke was being played on me, he didn't show any sign of being in on it. I averted my gaze toward the flames, breathing in its smoke and letting the awkward silence wash over our circle. Everything was so quiet. Then we heard the screaming. It was faint, but all four of us snapped our heads toward the forest, where we could hear the cries echoing through the trees. They sounded like they were coming from a short distance away, just past our clearing, down the other side of the mountain. "What the hell is that?" Autumn asked, jumping to her feet. "It sounds like someone is crying for help," Sylvia added, a little nervously. My first instinct was to call my friends out on their increasingly dumb and elaborate prank, but the cries coming from within the dense forest sounded too high-pitched and pitiful to belong to Mikey. It almost sounded like a wounded animal or a baby was wailing out calls of complete and utter desperation. I could just barely make out the word help, but everything else about the cries rang out with an eerie pitch that seemed entirely inhuman, like some creature trying to mimic the cries of a child. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't Mikey. "Okay, guys, this seriously isn't funny anymore. Please just tell me if this is a joke or not," I pleaded. "Catherine." Josh gave my shoulder a comforting squeeze. "We're just as confused as you are. I promise I'm going to check it out," Autumn announced, confidently stepping toward the tree line. "It's probably nothing, but I would feel horrible if someone actually needed our help." Sylvia looked almost as nervous as I felt, but she hesitantly let go of her girlfriend's hand and let her continue on toward the woods. I didn't want to let Autumn go, but I selfishly didn't want to be the one to step foot into the woods. The noise stabbed at my ear with an incessant drone that I wanted more than anything to end. I just wanted the noise to stop. I was naive enough to believe Autumn might be able to make that happen. A sharp chill crawled its way up my spine as I watched Autumn's body disappear between the twisted branches of the thick forest. I looked down at the 3 forgotten hot dogs broiling over the fire, and my stomach twisted. I had lost my appetite. Sylvia and Josh wanted to play cards while they waited for Autumn to return, but I wasn't in the mood. I faked a headache and retreated from the group, stepping over the forgotten hot dogs and slipping inside Mikey's tent. The crying from the woods had faded to a dull weeping, but whispers could still be heard cresting over the dense expanse of treetops. I zipped Mikey's tent shut behind me, drowning out the last of the wilting whimpers. I tried to distract myself by flipping through some books that Mikey had brought. Part of me was looking for some belongings of Mikey's to show to the group, something that would remind them of his existence. The other part of me was still in complete denial about what was happening to us. The messy collection contained mostly science fiction novels, but the largest book was different. It was large and leather-bound, the worn edges of its pages spilling out the sides. I flipped through a few pages and was faced with scratchy scrawl and disturbing depictions of creatures I could have never imagined. I knew Mikey was into some weird stuff. I was fairly certain he believed in Bigfoot, but this was a whole different level of weird. I wanted to believe it was another prank, something he had brought to show off around the campfire to scare us all. But some of the pages had bookmarks and notes in Mikey's handwriting scribbled in the margins. It was pretty clear he was taking what was written in this book seriously. I turned through pages depicting woodland yetis and wendigos of increasing horror until my eyes felt itchy and my brain pulsed with even more paranoia. When I reached the middle of the book, a small stack of papers fell out. They were printed out website pages of research Mikey had done on our campsite. It was all there. Information on the missing hikers, the commune, and even some research on settlers who had lived in this area. I skimmed all the printouts and nothing seemed overtly strange about the stories. It just seemed like a string of bad luck to me. The thing I found the most odd was Mikey's obsessive fascination with this place. I pushed the papers away, curling up on Mikey's sleeping bag and shutting my eyes. I didn't feel panicked, just exhausted. What was happening around me was so wrong that my brain had no choice but to reject it entirely. Sleep found its way to me, muffling my awareness for moments of fitful dreaming before I would once again come back to myself and hear the sounds of crickets and birds. In my dreams I had no choice but to replay the sound we had heard in the forest until even that found its way into my waking moments, mingling discordantly with the chirping crickets. It took me far too many dizzy, half-conscious moments to realise that the sound was no longer merely a remnant of my dreams. It was real. The screaming had returned. Josh and Sylvia were sitting on logs playing a ferocious game of Go Fish when I rejoined them. I had no idea how long I had been asleep for, but the sky had already begun to soften into a dusty orange, and my heart sank when I noticed that autumn was nowhere to be seen. "Do you guys hear that?" I asked. The sound was still faint, but I was certain I could hear it cresting over the mountain once again. The same quiet but desperate calls for help, echoing off the abundant sea of trees that surrounded us. The incessant wailing drone continued to roll over me, sending a new bout of nausea through my body. "Yeah, I hear it too," Sylvia confirmed. "Should one of us go check it out? Someone might be in trouble out there." "Yeah." Josh nodded in agreement. "I can go see what the problem is." "No!" I shouted a bit too frantically. "I don't think anyone else should go out there until autumn comes back." Sylvia looked me dead in the eye and asked, "Who is Autumn?" Chills pricked at every inch of my clammy skin. "Autumn?" I yelled. "Your girlfriend. She went into the forest hours ago and she still isn't back." "What the hell, Catherine?" Sylvia spat at me. "Having to be the third wheel on you and Josh's camping trip is bad enough, without you making jokes about me having some imaginary disappearing girlfriend. Whatever joke you're trying to make seriously isn't funny." I turned to Josh, hoping he might back me up, but his usually supportive gaze conveyed only disappointment, as if I was truly making a joke at Sylvia's expense. "It's not a joke," I insisted. "And you aren't a third wheel. The 5 of us all agreed to come on this trip together." I pulled out my phone and frantically tapped at the screen, attempting to produce some kind of evidence to support my claims. Our group chat, or a picture of all 5 of us together. Anything that could prove to my friends and to myself I wasn't completely losing my grip on reality. It was dead. Of course it was. All our phones were probably dead by now. The gravity of the situation I had been denying all morning finally hit me. We were miles and miles away from civilization. All our phones were dead. There was something out there drawing us into the forest, and anyone who crossed the tree line was being forgotten. Autumn was gone. Mikey was gone. And Mikey had the car keys. The insurmountable circle of trees that surrounded us felt like it was closing in on me, flooding our once idealistic campsite with a wave of dense, sticky dread that crept up my spine and tightly wound around my throat. I couldn't breathe. "Whatever." Sylvia rolled her eyes. "I'll let you guys spend some quality time together. I'm going to go on a long walk. Alone." I wanted to reach out and stop her, but my feet felt like they were rooted to the ground. The sounds from the forest had faded once again, but the fear they had awoken in me still pulsed through my arteries. As I watched Sylvia's back sink into the tree line, I prayed once again that this was all just some horrible prank. Josh and I passed the remaining hours until sunset in silence. We sat side by side on a log, watching the tree line that Sylvia's body had sunk into. I could tell from Josh's pursed lips and furrowed brow that he was upset and confused by my crazed outburst, and he was worried about Sylvia. He wouldn't look at me. He would only look straight forward at the forest. I couldn't think of a single thing to say. My body was paralysed and my brain was foggy. This all still felt to me like some odd dream, nothing that could exist in our realm of reality. I felt a tug toward the now too silent forest. My friends were in there, and I was the only person left to save them. Could I really just sit here and let them disappear? Could I walk away from Josh and leave him to come in after me? We sat there in silence, watching the forest as the sun began to set and the orange sky began to burn into black. The tension in Josh's face began to ease. The worried creases on his forehead flattened out, and a thoughtless smile lifted the corners of his lips. He had forgotten. He had forgotten everything. "The forest is so beautiful, isn't it?" he asked me. "I'm so glad we decided to take this trip together, just the two of us." I told Josh I wanted to head to bed early, and he agreed. As soon as I heard his breathing become slow and even, I crept from our tent as silently as I could. I tiptoed around our mostly abandoned campsite and tried to ignore how creepy our once lively circle of tents now felt. As I rummaged through each of my friends' belongings, looking for anything that could help Josh and I get out of here, I felt like I was traipsing through a ghost town. In the end, I found nothing. The car keys were nowhere to be found, and the food and water we had left would only last us another day or two at most. I made my way back down the mountain, constantly tripping and scuffing up my hands and knees as I tried to traverse the massive boulders in the dark. After what felt like hours, I reached the van. I pulled desperately at each of the locked handles, but none of the doors budged. I collapsed against the cool metal of the van and let myself exhale a loud, frustrated sob. I felt completely and utterly defeated. Whatever was going on within my own broken, twisted mind or out in the dense shadows of the forest was completely out of my control, and there seemed to be no escape. I was so tired and confused. I just wanted to sleep, but the fear of Josh wandering into the forest while I slept kept me from closing my weary, drooping eyelids. If he was all I had left, if the rest of my friends were truly gone, the only thing I could do was get him out of this forest alive. I steeled myself and forced my shaking hands to pick up a rock off the ground. I was readying myself to smash through one of the van's windows when a faint wail made me stutter. The sound was faint from where I now stood, but it was undeniably present in the otherwise silent forest. The screams had returned. As I scrambled my way back up the mountain, getting lost, tripping and falling over my feet in the darkness, I realized the sound was growing louder than ever and even more high-pitched and pitiful sounding than I remembered. I tried to follow the sound back to our campsite, but it seemed to pulsate from every direction, bleeding through every inch of the forest, making me completely unsure of where I was going. "Help!" it cried over and over again until the word tangled in on itself and lost all meaning. When I finally reached camp, it was just in time to see Josh's silhouette disappear into the tree line. I screamed after him, but it was too late. He was gone. I had only one choice left. I had to go in after him. I sprinted past our deserted tents and into the dense tree line. Twisted branches seemed to come at me from every direction, scratching my face and arms as I sprinted deeper and deeper into the dark forest. "Josh! Josh!" I called, again and again, until my voice turned hoarse and unrecognizable. I could feel my breath becoming more and more desperate and erratic, but I had no time to rest or slow down. I had to find Josh before it was too late, before he disappeared into the forest forever. The mountain was steeper on this side, descending into a cliff that jutted out in odd, uncontrollable angles. I hung onto the trees to keep myself upright, scanning the impenetrable darkness for any signs of movement. At one point, I thought I saw something move out of the corner of my eye, but when I scrambled my way over to the shape, it was just another pile of fallen bricks, more remnants of what had been lost on this mountain. My legs felt numb and uncontrollable, and I was too disoriented to catch myself as one of my ankles twisted and I fell blindly. I could feel the impact of sharp rocks and branches as my body flipped and rolled down the side of the mountain, stopping only when my leg snagged under a boulder and pulled my limp body to a halt with a jolt of excruciating pain. I felt myself cry out with uncontrollable pain and rage. I couldn't stop the pitiful sobs that racked my broken, mangled body as I lay helpless in the dark, deserted forest. I stared up at the beautiful starry sky and I blindly felt my way down to my wound. I was met with hot, wet blood, torn fabric and something sharp. I know now that I was feeling my protruding bone, but back then my brain refused to even consider this. I couldn't fathom it. I couldn't fathom any of it. Tears stung my eyes. I was stuck. There was no way I could make it to safety, and everyone I had brought with me onto this cursed mountain was now gone. I cried and begged for help for what felt like eternity. I screamed with pitiful, high-pitched desperation until my words tangled in on each other and lost all meaning. I don't know how long I was there, alone on the side of the mountain. It was probably only an hour, but it felt like days. My wailing became subconscious, just something that happened with every haggard breath I took. I winced every time I heard the pitiful, inhuman cries for help, but I could not seem to bring myself to stop. All I could seem to do was listen as the strange, broken creature continued to cry. I didn't hear the sound of approaching feet until it was almost on top of me. Then finally a figure emerged from between the trees. I thought my broken mind might be playing tricks on me until the figure came closer and I could make out a face. It was Mikey. It was so odd, I barely even recognized him at first. He looked like a complete stranger, or someone I had not set eyes on in several years. He just stood there for a moment, staring at me, and I wasn't even sure if he could see my face in the darkness. "I heard screaming," he muttered so softly I could barely hear the words. "Mikey?" I finally managed to croak out into the empty air between us. "It's me, Catherine." He looked at me so strangely, none of his usual mirth brightening his features, and for one horrible moment I was certain he was going to open his mouth and ask, "Who's Catherine?" Instead, he scooped me up in his long arms and carried me back up the mountain. We made it back to the campsite, and I was certain I was imagining things when I saw Autumn, Sylvia, and Josh emerge from their tents, bleary-eyed and confused at the sounds of Mikey's cries for help. They had crowded around us asking a million questions. I was somewhat aware of Josh's hands on my face, Sylvia's shrill voice, but everything was muted behind the searing pain in my leg and the ringing in my ears. Everything was happening very fast. I was jostled into Josh's arms and taken back down to the van. We rode back to civilization, bringing only the bare essentials with us. My friends were shouting and crying in confusion, trying to talk to me, but I couldn't hear anything they said. In my mind, all I could hear were the screams.